Greetings, TEPSA members. My name is Sanée and I am a principal in Katy ISD at Morton Ranch Junior High School. And I'm excited to talk with you today during this Fast 15 tips for administrators. I want to talk about building high-performing teams, specifically engaging in productive conflict. This summer, I participated in a project co-edited and co-authored, Volume 2 of Education Right Now, where educators from across the country chose different topics to write about. These topics are hot topics in education, and our theme is top strategies for improving relationships and culture. So the topic that I wrote about this summer was engaging in productive conflict. And so I want to share just some quick tips and things for you. I'm sure at this time of year, the honeymoon is wearing off and the newness of the relationships is beginning to wear off as well. And so when it comes to building high-performing teams, engaging in productive conflict is critical. And just hearing the word conflict can sometimes conjure negative emotions. You'll hear people say, I don't really want any conflict. I'm just going to lay low and just roll with whatever the group says. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the best ideas are getting on the table. And so I want to reframe the word conflict and put the qualifier productive in front of conflict, so that we can figure out how to best engage with one another so that we can build the best teams possible for our students. So let's dive in. What's really critical and important when we're working with others is understanding our personalities. We all have our personalities, our quirks, things that make us who we are. But workplace personalities are often underutilized, and sometimes we may participate in an activity in the beginning of the year. It may be a true colors assessment, Myers-Briggs, strength finders, what have you. And we do the personality assessment. We learn a little bit about ourselves. We talk about it with our peers, and then it's like, oh, that was fun. But I can't tell you how important it is to revisit those different personality assessments when you spend the time to do those as a staff. Let me give you a great illustration of this. When I was an elementary principal, my first couple years, I never could understand why my staff had a lot of questions. In my personal opinion, they were questions that weren't really about the work. They were like logistical type questions, you know, when is lunch duty, when is recess, things that in my view, they just were not that critical. So probably about my third year at this elementary principalship, I came across a protocol, and it was a Compass Points protocol, National School Reform Faculty. Google it. They have tons of protocols that you can use. And this one I actually did when I was working on my doctoral work. And I said, you know, this would be great to do with my staff. So it's a Compass Points activity, and it has the directions, north, south, east, west. And the directions also have some descriptors and qualifiers of different types of personality traits and how people like to work best. So I gave this to my staff, and what was so eye-opening at this particular point in my career, I would consider myself to be a North. North people are just like, let's do it, let's get after it, we're going to try some new ideas. Not really sure what it's going to look like, but we're going to go and we're going to try it. The majority of my staff, I would say 85% of my staff, they were West. And the West personality types are the details. They need to know A1, A2, B. They can't move forward without knowing each detail and how that plan is going to come together. Well, one of the portions of the protocol includes kind of a reflection piece, and it explains the different directions, and it says, which personality type do you find most difficult to work with? And for the North, the most difficult to work with is the West, and for the West, the most difficult to work with is the North. That was so eye-opening, and it really changed how I began to communicate with my staff. So in the beginning of the year, I typically would wait till later in the week to talk about the logistical things that needed to take place. But once I found out that my staff really needed that in order to do their best work, I began to talk about the logistical things first, because I knew that they wouldn't be able to be open and their mind wouldn't be free unless they had all those questions answered. And so it helped me to reframe my communication style with my staff, and it helped us to work better together. So it wasn't about, originally I was like, I just don't understand why they're asking all these questions. They're driving me crazy. It became, you know what, this is what they need in order to do their best work. I can make adjustments because it didn't cost me anything other than changing how I communicated to best meet their needs. This current school year at my current school, we've done the DISC personality assessment. And this is a different personality assessment. It's actually the one that we used was free. You go to tonyrobbins.com/DISC. And it's just an assessment that asks a variety of questions. And it took about 15 to 20 minutes in the beginning of the year, but it gives you a detailed report about your workplace personality. And we've done a couple of different protocols that we've reflected on ourselves. We've also reflected on what we need to know about working with other people, and we revisit that constantly. And so before you can even get into the meat of the work, when you're talking about a high-performing team and engaging in productive conflict, you have to know the personality styles of the people you are surrounded with, because what typically happens unintentionally, but this is just the way we are, when things become a little rocky, which we know that that's going to happen, we begin to blame the person instead of just thinking about what do they need, or how are they processing this, and how are they filtering this. And so that changes conflict for the sake of, they're just being difficult, to conflict for the sake of what do they need in order to be their best possible self. So that's your first tip. Figure out what is the dynamic of each individual on your team. How does that impact you? And then also, what do you need to do, and what do you need to understand, and understanding how to work best with the teammates around you. There are a lot of different tools you can use, strength finders, the true colors, the animals. I say, I can't say this one is better than the other one. I like to use variety and see where they cross over to meet the needs of myself and my staff. Next, that's critical, is establishing collective agreements. You'll hear norms and PLCs, we agree to be on time, tame our technology, just kind of generic rules of engagement. Norms, I think, when it comes to working with a small group for a short period of time, yes, I can agree to these basic principles of working together. But when I'm working with a group of people for an extended period of time, I like to focus on collective agreements. This is a protocol that we use, and collective agreements are different than norms because you actually take the time to talk about things that you've experienced working with other groups where you've been your best possible self, and times when you really haven't had the opportunity or the best environment to be your best possible self. We spend about an hour establishing these collective agreements, and the word collective means together. So you could have norms, and it's like someone may jot some stuff down, and it's like, yeah, do you agree? You can say, yeah, I agree. But when you're talking about collective, each individual voice is heard, and it's the agreement that we agree to engage in this work together. We're going to use these collective agreements to push our work forward. It gives everyone the voice. It gives everyone in the group a voice, and it also allows each member to share what it is they need. A lot of times, members of groups, especially those who may not feel comfortable sharing, or they've worked in groups before where there are people who railroad the group or overtake the group, they just kind of sit back. But with collective agreements, everyone has to participate and everyone has to share what they need, and then at the end the group agrees on those agreements. Interesting enough, I can't tell you how many times I'll have someone come in from a team and they're struggling with someone on their team. My first question is, well, what did you guys agree to? How did you agree to behave with one another? You see, it's really important to continue to come back and review these agreements, put them on your agenda, read over them before you begin the meeting, close the meeting with them. They should be present. It shouldn't just be a chart paper that you did in the beginning of the year and then it went away. It needs to constantly be revisited, and people need to be reminded of what it is we agreed to do and how we agreed to work with one another. And so when someone comes into my room, or into my office rather, and they're having a problem with a teammate, I always say, How did you guys agree to engage with one another, especially when conflict comes? And that's critical. Conflict is going to arise. It's inevitable. We're humans. There is no relationship that does not go through some period of time where there's some type of conflict. And so having those agreements established prior to the conflict happening will definitely help the team move forward when it does arise. Which leads us to preparing for the wave of conflict. So, challenges ahead. All the work that you do on the front end, your personality assessments, understanding that this person does this because, not because they're trying to be difficult, but because their personality, these are the strengths of their personality. These are the things that I'll see when they're not their self. These are the things that they'll see when I'm not in touch with myself. And so understanding and studying the different personalities is one way to prepare for the wave of conflict. Secondly, when you have those collective agreements and you know that the conflict is coming, it anchors, okay, what are our rules of engagement? If I'm having a conflict with a teammate, I know that we said we would agree to, and you go back to those collective agreements. It takes the tension out, and it makes it more of a productive conversation when you engage in, you know what, I understand that you have this type of personality or this type of need, and I have this personality style or need, and I think this is where we are not seeing eye to eye. As we mentioned, we agreed to, you see, and so you're building and you're preparing for that wave of conflict. So it's not just individual activities that happen because we need something to do in August for professional development, or we need to check a box for team building. These things are really intentional activities that are the foundational pieces for when the conflict comes. You cannot engage in productive conflict in the absence of true relationships. When there are no relationships, there will be no productive conflict. So you have to take the time to build relationships and establish relationships and ground rules with the people that you're working with, so that when the conflict comes, which we know it is coming, we can engage in productive conflict, and it becomes about the solutions to the issues instead of about the person. So next, using conflict to attack adaptive challenges. There are two types of challenges that we face in our profession. We have technical challenges, and those are things as simple as changing the lunch schedule, the recess schedule, the master schedule, just things that are logistical. You don't really have to learn a new skill. It may be somewhat annoying if you have a team that they're used to having first period specials time, and now you're going to move them to the end of the day. I mean, that may rock some worlds of some of your teachers, but mostly those are things that you don't have to acquire any new skills, and so you just have to get used to the new way of doing things. Adaptive challenges is where we struggle in our profession. This is when there is a new skill that has to be learned, some new type of knowledge has to be acquired, and it truly is adapting to a completely different situation. We have to maybe change our behaviors or change our approaches. We may even have to change the people that we're working around. And so it is at this point when the conflict and tension is raised because there's some type of adaptive challenge that we just don't necessarily know how to solve. I mentioned productive conflict. If you want to get the best ideas on the table, we have to be able to throw out on the table our ideas, our solutions, our wisdom, bringing all of our experiences together and recognize that there's not one expert in the room, it's all of us. And through getting our ideas out on the table in a way that we feel safe and that they're not going to be criticized or people are not going to be critical about what we're saying, that is the key to overcoming adaptive challenges. If we knew the answer to our adaptive challenges, they wouldn't be adaptive. Okay, so when we take the time to really get the best on the table using the experiences and the wisdom of the collective group, that is when we're on our way to engaging in productive conflict that will help us to come up with the best solutions to some of our problems that we have in our buildings and in our profession. So the storm. I always like to talk about October. I don't know what it is about October. It just seems to be that, in August we're on fire, September we're rocking and rolling, and then all of a sudden October hits. And here we are. I can't think of a better time in the year to be recording this webinar about handling conflict in the middle of the storm. And so I think I mentioned to someone, I'm like, I think October-itis is among us. And that could be with adults having conflict with one another, kids having conflict with one another. I think it's a long haul before the next break. And so things are going to begin to come up, if they haven't already, at your current campus. As the leader, it is absolutely your responsibility to handle the conflict in the middle of the storm. Things that no one else can handle in the building, that's on you. And so when a staff member may come and there's something that is threatening our culture, I own that work. I am the culture police per se. I don't own the morale of everyone in the building, but I do have the responsibility of making sure that I create a culture where people feel supported, where they feel that they can engage in productive conflict, and where they feel that things that are pulling people away from the key work at hand, that's going to be addressed, such as people coming to work late, or people choosing to sabotage our school culture, all types of things that come up that make their way to your office and no one else can address and handle. It is our responsibility as the leaders in our building to handle the conflict in the middle of the storm, because we know that if we don't address those types of conflict, then there's no way our teams can get to the level of productive conflict that's definitely needed to engage in our best work in overcoming those challenges that we face. So what are some ways that we can resolve conflict productively? First and foremost, we have to be self-aware. We have to be self-aware as leaders. Sometimes we may be the reason for the conflict. And sometimes what we do unintentionally may be causing people to not feel that they can engage in productive conflict. So be self-aware and know your part. I can give a great example. Last year, we were having some transition in my building, and we were really stretched thin as an administrative team. And so I did not choose to communicate what I needed. I didn't ask for what I needed. I needed some help, and instead of talking to my team and saying, hey, this is what we can do, I held it in and I let it fester. And so until the point where I just exploded. And it was kind of a critical moment in our team, because I had to, number one, own my part in it, as well as lead through the conflict so that we can come on the other side of that. And so just knowing that things are not always going to be perfect, but recognizing my part in it is also very critical. So be self-aware. Also be open to feedback. If we're going to be asking teachers to be open to receiving our feedback and use the feedback to grow, as leaders, we need to be open to feedback as well. Don't put yourself in a situation where the only feedback that you set your staff up to give you is the warm, fuzzy feedback. We're not perfect, and so if we're really committed to making our organizations the best that they can be, then we need to allow our staff members to give us feedback. And it could be different forms. Most recently, I did first 6 weeks feedback, what's working really well, where do we need refinement, what do you need from me, what questions, concerns. And honestly, I got some great feedback, and there were a lot of things that I'm like, oh, I can make that adjustment. It's just something that I didn't think about. And I make it anonymous, but I always ask, if you want some follow-up, please leave your name. And so it would be foolish for me to take that feedback and do nothing with it and say, you know what, they're just going to have to figure it out. But it takes a real leader to take that feedback and actually see what we can do to make the organization better. Next, practice active listening. So I love this, because active means you're doing something, and listening is what you're doing. And so you're not listening to respond, you are truly listening to listen. And this is sometimes hard for leaders to do. I know sometimes it's difficult for me because we're problem solvers. And so sometimes we listen and we're listening to respond, or we're listening to solve the problem or give a solution. I sometimes even have to put candy in my mouth so that I will not speak. I write and jot down notes, and then I repeat. So what I hear you saying is, and I often ask, how do you want me to help? How can I help you? What is it that you need from me? Sometimes they don't need me to solve the problem or the solution. They just need me to listen. And so listening actively does not mean speaking. We have two ears and one mouth for a reason. So it means to take in what they're saying and to see what they may need from us as leaders to move forward. And then lastly, engaging in courageous conversations. Sometimes there are conversations that it's like, man, I just really don't want to have this. You're not sure how it's going to turn out. You're not sure if you can overcome the challenge that's being presented and that's put in front of you. But by not engaging in the courageous conversation, you're definitely giving conflict the opportunity to win, in the sense that it can be that negative piece of of conflict that can take your organization down. So instead of taking the time to have that courageous conversation with others, we tend to shy away from it. I'm going to challenge you to not shy away from the courageous conversations, but take them head on. Listen as you're having that conversation more than you speak, and ask questions more than you offer solutions. Through the questioning, I think is where the true uh, through listening is where the true piece of engagement comes in, when you're engaging with others that you're having that courageous conversation with. And I think those solutions come out through the reflective thinking. And to close, in great teams, conflict becomes productive. The free flow of conflicting ideas is critical for creative thinking. No one individual can come up with the best solutions on their own. So it is through the process of engaging in productive conflict that we begin to discover new solutions to our challenges. And it is at that point when we become a high productive team. I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen. And if I can be of any assistance on your journey, feel free to reach out and connect with me on Twitter at Sanée Bell, and also via my blog, SanéeBell.com. I've enjoyed this Fast 15. Stay tuned for more to come, and there'll be another one coming next week. Thank you.